Okay, so we're now live. I'm just going to wait on confirmation that it's working, and then we can get started. I think we have some of our mentees on YouTube. We have 11 of them, and then Tuka is here. Can anyone hear an echo by any chance, or was that just me? Okay, perfect. So we can get started. Hello, everyone. So I just wanted to point out to our attendees that are here that there's interpretation in Arabic happening right now. So if you click on the little globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can click on Arabic if you'd like, and we can get started. This video is also going to be recorded, so I'm going to start recording right now, and it's currently being live streamed on YouTube as well. I'm just going to take a second because there's an echo right now. So I'm just going to fix the echo and then get back to you in a sec. Okay, hopefully that's fixed that. Okay, so my name is Rima Amiri, and I'm currently working with the Forum of Federations. I will be moderating the discussion today. So welcome to today's webinar. It's going to be a virtual mentorship conference geared towards the mentees in the MENA mentorship program for future women leaders, part of the Forum of Federations MENA project, designed to empower women and advance inclusiveness in governance in the MENA region, specifically in Jordan, Morocco, and Tunisia. The mentees are all driven young women who work across sectors from policy to academia and have assigned mentors who are women that are well established in their fields. Today's discussion will explore finding the paths towards leadership and delving into the challenges that come with that, especially as women. We'll be speaking with 3 accomplished young Canadian women here, leaders in their respective communities, in the aim of knowledge sharing and experience sharing with the MENA mentees. Before we get started, I'm going to go through some housekeeping items to ensure that we can all interact with one another. Firstly, this discussion is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube and will be posted on the Forum of Federations MENA YouTube page. So in case you need to leave and come back to the discussion later, you can find the video there. We also have an open chat feature enabled for all of the mentees that are here. You can click on the chat icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you have any questions, we're going to have a Q&A option enabled at the bottom as well, where you can ask your questions throughout the conversation, but we'll also have a question period at the end. For those following us on YouTube, feel free to leave all questions and comments in the chat box, and we'll be looking through that as well. So welcome to all our mentees. I see that a few more have joined us. I just wanted to remind you that we sent a pre-activity questionnaire to you to fill out for this conversation. So throughout the day, if you have any time, it should take 2 minutes. Please fill out that survey. So without further ado, I want to warmly welcome our speakers today. So welcome Ali Raposo, Media Hassan, and Alyssa Frampton. We're so glad that you could be here today to share your insights on leadership paths and the different challenges that you faced as Canadian women, and to tell us more about who you are and what you have been up to. So thank you so much for that. And I think we can get straight into it. So I'll be introducing our panel, and then we can delve into the conversation. Our conversation is going to be divided in 3 parts today. So the first part, we're going to talk about finding a path to leadership, kind of introductions and different projects that our panel has been working on. A second part about overcoming challenges and the different challenges they faced as young women, but also throughout their leadership experiences. And finally, we're going to look into something that a bunch of our mentees had suggested, which is how to develop our own leadership style and how to define ourselves as leaders. So those are going to be our 3 parts. So our panel today, which I'm very excited about, we're going to start off with Media. So Media's from Ottawa, Ontario originally, although today she is in a different country that she can tell us about in a bit because she's part of the Schwarzman Scholars Program, if I am correct in that, but she'll tell you more about it. Media is a social entrepreneur who studied health sciences, biochemistry, and chemical engineering at the University of Ottawa. She is the co-founder and CEO of Dextra, which uses 3D printing technology to provide affordable prosthetics to amputees living in refugee and poverty zones. She led global partnerships to provide makerspace technology training to communities globally to scale up the production of affordable assistive technologies. Media used to manage accelerator programs that provide engineering students and recent alumni with support to fast track the commercialization of new technology and launch new technology startups. Media was awarded the 2018 Queen's Young Leader Award by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. She was also awarded the 2019 CBC Trailblazer Award and the 2019 Facebook Social Entrepreneurship Award for her work in Dextra. Media is currently also finishing her studies in the prestigious Graduate Fellowship Schwarzman Scholars Program. So thank you so much, Media, for being here today. No problem. I'm so glad that you were able to make it, especially since you're not even in the country. Okay, our next panelist, also super exciting, is from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Raposo. So Ali received her bachelor's degree in women's and gender studies and sociology in 2018. She's currently pursuing postgraduate studies in counseling and hopefully in human rights in the fall. During her undergraduate degree, Ali was successful in her run serving as the women's representative, then again successfully being elected in her run as the union representative. Ali developed incredible initiatives such as inclusive gym hours for women, as well as co-produced a short film called Take Back Our Campus. Her initiatives have earned her some tremendous awards in the past few years, including the University of Manitoba Emerging Leader Award in 2018, the CBC Manitoba Future 40 finalist, the YMCA Young Woman of Distinction Award, and many others. Ali was also listed as one of the 8 influential millennials in Winnipeg to watch. She currently sits on the board of directors for the Alpha House Project and was appointed the first Human Rights Committee of Council for the City of Winnipeg. She's the chair of both the Equity and Diversity Committee of Council, as well as the Accessibility and Inclusion Subcommittee of the Council for the City of Winnipeg. So welcome, Ali. So glad to have you here today.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
And then last but not least, from, well, currently in Newfoundland, but usually in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Alyssa Frampton, who is an associate with Wisdom to Action based in Halifax. Alyssa has worked at the intersections of community engagement, health, and policy for the past 7 years. She's led and advised many initiatives focused on youth and community-based mental health, children's rights, youth, and community engagement. She holds a political science degree from St. Mary's University and has completed additional courses in global adolescent health, youth mental health, harm reduction, and children's rights. She's applied her experiences in public relations and in developing policies. She has a wide range of experience driving change in many different organizations in Canada, including the Sandbox Project, AstraZeneca's Young Health Program, the Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada, and the Stop Marketing Kids Coalition. She has spoken at over 50 speaking events and workshops locally and globally, and has developed skills in facilitation, moderation, and public speaking. She's currently on, or has sat on, the Springtide Collective Board and was the chair of the Access Open Minds National Youth Council. She's currently leading a project on behalf of the Public Health Agency of Canada. So welcome, Alyssa. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, team. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I think we can get started with our conversation. I just wanted to remind all of those who've joined us in the webinar that there is simultaneous interpretation in Arabic. So if you go at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's an icon, the little globe. You can click on it and you can click on the Arabic if you'd like to listen to this conversation in Arabic. Okay, so let's get started. Our first part is about finding a path to leadership. So I'm going to start off by asking each of you to tell us a little bit more about a project that you've worked on in the past or some things that you're working on now. Maybe to start off, Ali, would you like to take it away?
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. So for myself, finding my path and working on, are we just talking about a project right now or specifically finding the path?
Something that you've been working on recently. So an initiative or policy or, yeah.
Sure. So recently, with my position in the City of Winnipeg Human Rights Committee of Council, I also chair the Equity and Diversity Subcommittee of Council. So with that being said, I was able to work with a lot of different stakeholders in the community and find out where there were injustices. And so basically we want to put our city human rights council on the map as kind of a hub for human rights. And in order to do that, we need to understand that diversity comes in many different forms. So when talking with a bunch of different groups and minority groups, they stated their concern and they expressed how they wanted to get involved in municipal government. So looking at, okay, what are the barriers? What can we do in order to have them involved in municipal government? How can we get them their voices heard, because their lived experience is the truth that we really want on these committees. So with that being said, I was able to create and draft a motion that essentially removed the Canadian citizenship requirement in order to sit on civic boards, committees, or commissions here in City of Winnipeg. So that still means that it's just changed over to permanent residency. And with that being said, it's looking at the inclusivity and the equity in that. So permanent residents, for many reasons, don't have their Canadian citizenship. However, they still give to our economy. They still are incredible members of our society and definitely can speak to the equity and diversity that we need or the lack thereof here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So through that motion, we kind of pushed it forward and we were successful on February 25th, the motion passed. And so working on that is just kind of a snowball. We've had a successful go in getting the requirement removed. However, now it's kind of led into a bigger snowball effect to look at permanent resident voting. So right now I'm really focused in those kind of areas when it comes to policy and engagement and how we can work on that, as well as when it comes to research. So I'm working currently right now on a 7-year research study, and it's in conjunction with Australia and the UK and the Netherlands. And we are looking at how infrastructure and just areas in the world can have a direct impact or can benefit or negatively impact an individual, and particularly a youth who's living with a cognitive disability. So just looking at different areas where we can be the most inclusive and wear our hats in so many different areas and make sure that things are not only accessible, but wanting to attend, they're enjoyable for others. So for me right now, that is the two biggest focuses. However, on the go and on the side, my constant advocacy in and working to end gender-based violence is always on the go. My current advocacy for mental health resources is always on the go, and making sure that we're holding the proper people accountable to ensure that these are ready for people who need them, like myself. So that's a little bit of the stuff that I'm working on currently.
Thank you for that overview, Ali. Those are such important initiatives. And I know that our two other panelists also work with diverse communities and marginalized communities as well. So I'm gonna ask Media the same question. So can you tell us a little bit more about a recent project you've been working on or something that you're currently involved in?
Absolutely. So over the past 2 years, I wore many hats and I did many projects in different sectors and different countries as well. But one of the most recent examples that just came to my mind is somewhere toward the end of 2019. Through my not-for-profit, I led a global partnership between our organization in Canada and another not-for-profit based out of Ghana. And what I think was interesting about that collaboration is that the two organizations in two different countries still use technology to solve social issues and to tackle inclusivity from different lenses. So we built that partnership with the hope to train locals, especially youth in Ghana, to be able to gain access to skills, knowledge, and the ecosystem they need to be able to produce or to be the leaders to produce assistive technologies and to build solutions for people in their community. So they're not dependent on people from the outside to supply them with the tools or the equipment that they need. So through that collaboration, it was actually more of a multi-sector collaboration, which is something that I haven't done before. So we had the government in Ghana to support us, the not-for-profit, we worked within a university in Ghana, and many other organizations in Canada. And we were funded by a few agencies in the UK as well. And for 2 weeks, we trained roughly 16 youth on the use of assistive makerspace technology. And this is based on the rapid prototyping tech. But also we taught them about the principles of design, talking to people who need, for example, assistive technology and device, and being able to build the ecosystem and the support and the mentorship they need so they could produce other assistive tech for people in their community. And we launched the first assistive technology makerspace in West Africa toward the end of our training as well. And it was definitely, looking back, it was a very challenging moment, but now I'm glad we did it. And we definitely learned a lot from that journey and that experience working with global organization and managing 2 teams remotely from different countries and being able to actually travel and implement the project that we worked on for over 6 months.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Media. It's interesting that you bring up skill building and mentorship. I think a lot of our panelists today also work in those fields and kind of capacity building and helping other youth develop their skills to kind of create changes in their communities. And I know, Alyssa, you have worked in that sector as well, in youth engagement and developing skills so that other people can also make change. Do you want to let us know a little bit more about that and kind of any recent projects or any recent activities you are a part of?
Sure, thanks, Eamon. And I agree, I totally made a note on my page that I was resonating with both Media and Ali when they were speaking, about capacity building in community, and Ali was talking about taking a human rights-based approach and making sure that people are able to, be a part of the changes in the policies that affect them. And I'm like, okay, well, we're going to have lots of similarities. It's going to be interesting to see, the different ways we approach that, but I think there's a lot of similarities there because, yeah, I think most of my work, as we'll talk about later, is really rooted in bringing the people who are affected by a certain policy or a service to the table so that they can really be at the forefront of driving that change. And I've really done that in a youth and child rights perspective a lot of the time, or around mental health. And so one of the projects that I really worked on a lot, particularly over the summer, and where I really had the privilege of meeting Reem was by working on a project called Young Canadians Parliament with an organization called Children's First Canada. And so, as Reem mentioned in my bio, I'm a consultant, so I work with different organizations all the time. But we built out in this program, Young Canadians Parliament, really around the UNCRC, so the United Nations rights on the child, and really building it out around Article 12 and children's rights to participate. And then looking at how do you give young people not only education on their rights, but also helping to develop their skills on actually being able to advocate for those rights and understand how to facilitate those rights in their everyday life. So a big part of that program was bringing young people into conversations, into smaller breakouts, so that they could help build their capacity with other young people and learn about their rights, but also then going back and speaking to parliamentarians and being able to have those conversations, unfortunately digitally because of the pandemic climate that we are in, but really being able to sit down with different parliamentarians and say, as a young person, these are the things that matter to me and how change needs to be affected. And one of the things that they really were able to, advocate on was around having a commissioner for children and youth, and that's still been really pushed forward in the House, and there's still a lot of conversations with senators having taken that issue really on. And I think being able to see how young people came together in that project, and it's moving into stage 2, but I was really privileged to have the opportunity to bring in the first lot of young people who advised on that role and recruit all the different participants, and to build out all of the different workshops and the skill building tools and all of the pre-learning pieces. So I got to do a lot of the heavy lifting with a really cool youth team on that project. And then similarly to Ali, I also work in a research space a lot of times. So I'm just finishing up helping with a 5-year research project around youth mental health services across Canada. So we've had 14 sites. It's called Access Open Minds. And really, similarly to what I mentioned, like bringing young people into policies and services that affect them, my role has really been facilitating not only engagement, but the research piece around how young people can be a part of service change in their community. So what does that look like, and how does that change over different communities? And also, what do young people need to build their capacities to continue that change beyond, just a one-off research project? So how do we make sure that we're not just giving people money or giving people services for small periods of time, but how do we make sure we're building up community capacity so that those experiences last? So yeah, I think that it's going to be a really interesting conversation, and I'm super excited to keep diving into these things further as we go on. But those are some of the things I'm working on, like right now or in the last little bit.
Thanks so much, Alyssa, and thank you to all three of you for that overview on what you do. So it's pretty impressive. You're all involved in a lot of different things, and you've had this drive for a long time now, kind of following your path the past few years. You're also all in your 20s, which I mean is pretty impressive for all of that you have accomplished so far. And so I think we can start this conversation off by looking at how you have arrived at where you are today. So maybe starting off with what inspired you to get into the field that you're currently in now? How did you find this focus? What made you interested in it? Because obviously to create a nonprofit or to create a human rights committee or to work on a young Canadians parliament, you had to find that passion somewhere in the start, right? And so do you want to start off, maybe Ali, by letting us know how it is that you got involved in this? Where does this passion come from? And then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So for myself, I lived with mental illness since I was 14 years old. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of resources. Nowadays you see a lot of school campaigns or, Bell Let's Talk, or even just speakers that will come to the school, maybe not in person, so maybe virtually right now. But nonetheless, there are a lot of more resources. It was a lot more talked about now. Back in the day, and when I was in high school back in the day, there wasn't any. We didn't have anything. So, we talked about the very general stuff in health class, and that's all physical health, whereas we didn't focus too much on mental health. So for me, I started having symptoms of my mental illness, and I had no idea what was going on. Not a clue, because I didn't know anything about what was going on. So living that way was a complete journey on its own, and I'll say that shortly. But it was not knowing what was going on in my life. So I constantly had panic attacks, but at the time I didn't know they were panic attacks. So for me, it was, I couldn't breathe all the time. My heart was constantly racing. And I was so sure that I had a problem with my heart or maybe my respiratory system. And I was convinced of it. There was nothing else in the world that I could think could possibly be happening. So that year I spent about my entire life going in and out of the hospital. I took so many ambulance rides. I spent all of my life just convinced that there was something wrong with me and something wrong with me physically. It wasn't until I saw one doctor who said to me, Ali, you're 14 years old. You don't have heart failure. I shouldn't be seeing you this much. I'm a cardiologist. And I said, well, I don't know what's going on. I can't find any answers. And she said to me, have you ever heard of anxiety? And at that point, I hadn't heard of it, but I went home and I spent my entire night on YouTube researching exactly what it was. And that was kind of my huge, oh, wow, this is what I have. But for me, I didn't talk about it. And that was one of my bigger downfalls. So it was, I didn't talk about it to my friends because I didn't want to be that weak girl who was all of a sudden taking on the world and was doing all these things, but then had a weakness and a barrier in front of her. I also thought it was embarrassing. Like, these people are going to make fun of me. this thing isn't logical in my head. And I'm a very logical thinker and a rational thinker. So when I have these things that aren't rational and don't make sense going on in my head, how can I even make sense of it or explain it? So I didn't talk about it enough, not nearly enough, only to my mom and my close support system, but not to my friends. I would even lie. I would say, my mom said I couldn't come out tonight, but the fact of the matter is I just wasn't feeling well. And that led to a lot of depression in my life, and just increased that isolation and a feeling of alone. And then I started to talk about it. It took a little bit of time, but heading into university, I started to talk about it. I was terrified to do so, but when I did, I found that there was a community out there. So what happened was I had a woman approach me, and she asked me if I would speak at the first ever Winnipeg's March for Mental Health. So I went from not talking about it to anybody to talking about it at the first Winnipeg March for Mental Health. I was absolutely terrified. And to this day, I can remember the wind and, my knees buckling and just completely terrified and feeling like I was never going to be able to talk about it. And to be honest with you, I don't even remember what I said because I was so anxious that it was just gone in my head. So after that, it was huge for me. But when I went home, I looked at my social media and I saw a few people reach out to me. And those people reached out to me and they said, if it weren't for hearing what you said today, I wouldn't have thought that I was going to make it. And they said, if I didn't hear what you said today and you shared your story about the vulnerability and the rawness of what it's like to live with mental illness and anxiety, depression, OCD, I wouldn't have been able to move on. You inspired me. And that right there was worth it completely. So that kind of started my inspiration. I want to make sure that no other child or no other young person feels alone at home thinking that they are going to be like this or that there's something wrong with them. So that was my big inspiration. And for me, it's only really cultivated since then. It's only been an extension of that. I've learned to really turn all of my wounds in my life into wisdom and to take all of that and to put it into all of my passion. So moving forward, I went into university. I still had some downfalls and I still had to struggle with my mental illness, learning who I was, running in politics, understanding that there was a lot of leadership that I could take of that. And that leadership wasn't for me just sitting in a fancy office and getting all the great benefits that you do have when you are a student politician, but it was working for the better of other people and for the betterment of other people and to improve their quality of life. So again, an extension of how can I make things better in my privilege and my role that I do have right now. And that was always a big inspiration for me, understanding that I had this role and that I had a duty to use it properly. I only started getting involved in gender-based violence and ending it in university. I was actually a victim of a road rage assault, which left me a victim having to go to court. It was incredibly awful. It was a strange man. It was nobody that I knew. So it was just a strange attack that actually left me with PTSD, very bad. And then what I did was I got a lot of hate online from that. People online are trolls. They will want to pull you down in areas where you don't, where you're already down. They want to kick you when you're down. But I ran in the other direction with that. So I created a fundraiser with one of my friends on campus in my role as women's representative. And we held a full day campus long, day long initiative. And that was to raise money and awareness for domestic violence. And then moving forward from that was my spearhead of, leading the Women's March on Washington here in Winnipeg, Manitoba as one of the organizers, and then sitting on the board of directors for ending gender-based violence for Alpha House, which is a shelter. So for me, that was always my inspiration, was seeing other people and seeing that there's a need and that I was able to do it and I was able to overcome it. So through those things is always my benefit of how many women reached out to me after that. I went on the news, I talked about my story, I was vulnerable, and I was terrified because the world is not that nice of a place when you go on the media sometimes. And I was terrified about it. But you know what? The hundreds of messages that I received from women who were now not afraid to come forward about what was going on in their life and now felt more empowered to talk about what was going on in their life. That again was so worth it for me. It made everything and all of my pain and anything I may have faced online so worth it because I was doing what I knew was the right thing. And that was always my big inspiration. For me, I've always said it to my family is that my focus, and it's strange, and I don't know if it's for others, but my focus has always been pain or something that has taught me a lesson in my life. So if I'm down or if I'm going through something hard, if I'm going through a heartache, I'm only going to get up stronger. And that's just how I work as an individual. So for me, my inspiration is always others and the best interest of others and learning from lived experience. So looking at my life as a second generation immigrant, working in the newcomer and inclusion area, MENA is huge for me. Working on policy development is massive for me. Having a mother as a frontline worker, looking at public health and making sure that we can have efficient policies that work for everybody. That is my inspiration, has always been from those who are in my circle and then things that I've experienced in my life. So inspiration comes from within for me, and it comes from things that I've learned that are hard and hardships that I've seen, but the people in the community and what I've seen as benefits and what I've seen as empowering and women coming up on top, that has been my inspiration, and it will always be my inspiration every single day.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ali. I loved what you said about turning your wounds into wisdom. That's extremely powerful. I think finding inspiration in what's hard and what's difficult and what's challenging, and then trying to find solutions and kind of extending those solutions beyond yourself, but also to your community, and in terms of leadership and changing policies and making sure that everyone has a better life in the end, which is exactly what you said. So thank you for sharing that. The same question goes out to media as well, if you want to follow on that. So what inspired you? How did you find your focus? I know you had kind of a different path. You started off in something, ended up in something else. So if you want to talk about that a little bit, go ahead.
Absolutely. So what I'm about to share might actually sound very familiar to many of people listening to us today, because I grew up in the Middle East, and I grew up within a culture that is so beautiful, so rich, but to some extent, going through school and being able to, you're told since you're young what you should study, and it's always, be a physician, be an engineer, be this, be that. Now, funny enough, I was accepted to med school. I did engineering, but I don't work in either fields. But at the end of the day, since I was young, I always had ideas. I cared about issues. I always wanted to solve things, but I just did not know what to do or how to do anything. I remember, if someone tells me a story, or I watch something sad on TV, I just think of why is no one doing anything about it, or what's going on? And there was that level, but also the school system I went through, or the kind of the culture around me, was very different. That did not enable me to understand what possibilities exist. I grew up without necessarily having a role model or someone to look up to, if that makes sense in life. But moving to Canada, I think that move made me get out of my comfort zone and learn new stuff. And initially, I was still, when I see issues, I think that, one day when I have the time on my hand, I will go solve them, or maybe someone will do something about something else. And after studying sciences and working in DNA research, I really enjoyed that field, but I just knew that it wasn't meant for me. I knew that I had so many ideas in my brain. I had so many things I wanted to do. I just did not know what to do. So I decided to go back to engineering and to do kind of more practical degree, to be able to build stuff, to look at things differently. And around that time, I made a decision, and it took me a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, but especially I had to reflect back on myself, my personality, who I am as a person. And I listened to people's stories and ideas, and I just noticed that people did things. No one had any formal training in leadership or what to do anything. They just go ahead and they do what they want to do. And sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't, but at the end of the day, they just try. So I decided to do things that makes me uncomfortable. I took a class that made me very uncomfortable. I had to do many things I never done in my life, including doing a business pitch, a business plan. And then I got hired by the professor who I worked for the past 5 years. I led different programs, initiatives. But I think that moment that made me realize that you control what you want to do in life, and that you shouldn't wait for the right time or the right person or the right opportunity to do anything. And you're the one who's in complete control. That's, I guess, the moment that helped me change my view about many issues and made me more vocal about the issues I want to tackle. Now, around 2015, when the global refugee crisis started, that's when Canada opened up the door for over 20,000 refugees. And there was that question of well, what am I going to do about this? How can I help? And it took, I talked to my boss, I talked to my colleagues, and we thought, you know what, we're just going to go and talk to refugees and see what we can do. And I kind of helped leading a refugee outreach program where we worked with refugees. We equipped adults with the skills, the knowledge, the network to find jobs. We worked with kids to teach them some basic literacy skills that they missed because they did not go to school. And one thing led to the other. I met my team members, and we did not think of the not-for-profit that I still run till now as something that it's going to be what it is now, but we just knew that we had the knowledge, resources, and the ability, to some extent the privilege, to solve issues that other people in the world can't solve. And we knew that access to healthcare products and services in poverty zones, refugee zones is really extreme. So we just knew that we had what it takes to solve the problem. And we just decided to do anything. We started reaching out to people, talking to community members, doing many things. And honestly, one thing led to the other. Once you kind of put yourself out there and you take a lead and willing to actually tackle an issue, and especially asking questions that no one dares to ask, or trying to kind of reach out to organization and, you know, ask them to be accountable to some of the things that they should be doing. This by itself builds your own confidence and help you look at things differently. And I think in my case specifically, what have helped me accelerate the work that I have done, because I'm going to be very extreme and say I went from a very dormant stage of like over 22 years to suddenly an exponential change in everything I do. And it was truly just being able to change my mindset and know that I am capable of doing what I want to do. And if I set my mind to something, I'm going to keep doing it. And trying to actually enjoy and reward the journey to some extent. Similar to what Ali mentioned, once you see the result of the work you do and the fact that you impact people's life, you can't walk away from these things. I dealt with many children who were amputees and we had to give them prosthetic hands. It honestly broke our hearts when we have to see the pictures and stories and documents. We failed many times, and honestly, we felt continue working. But when we do know that we, had a successful implementation or a happy client at the end of the day, someone who have the ability of actually, it might be a prosthetic to some people, but to them it might be just a message of hope and the ability to gain control in some aspect of their life. That alone is a feeling that you can't walk backward from. And I think in my case specifically, coming from such a diverse yet completely misunderstood culture and coming into Canada, it became more of a sense of responsibility that when I go and I do a lot of public speaking across the country and globally as well, and there will always be one or two individuals who come to me at the end, and they're usually people who identify with similar complex identities like myself, and they tell me things of like, we never thought that what you did is possible for anyone. We never thought that you could walk away from some of the traditional jobs to do things that you care about, but also bring you an income, but also give you that potential to explore different avenues in life. So just being able, I grew up without role models. So knowing that maybe one day I'll be the role model for someone else, that also something that drives me and motivates me. But definitely that shift in mindset of not waiting for someone or something all the time to get things done, and just do it now. And just do it as soon as you can. Even if you fail, just try your best. That shift in mindset just helped me unleash many potentials and opportunities that came my way.
Thank you for sharing that, Media. And definitely, I think everything that you said about kind of speaking with communities and trying to find the different gaps and the different problems, and then finding something that you could help with and just trying it out, even if you don't have the solution or you don't have the exact plan or you don't feel like you know how to do it, just trying it out is extremely important. And I think a lot of people, especially young women, tend to kind of create barriers for themselves or stop, like kind of self-censor beforehand, before trying. And yeah, for sure. Like I grew up watching your experience and watching your leadership journey. And I think you have become a role model for a lot of people who didn't have role models for them in your community. And so I think that for all of our mentees here, just trying something out and doing it, even if it's not common in your community and it's not common around you, is extremely important, because you're going to start something that'll continue later on. So yeah, moving on from that, I think, Alyssa, same question to you. What inspired you? How did you get into what you're currently working with? How did you find your focus?
Yeah, thanks, Raymond. I think I obviously very different experience from Media, but at the same time, I really resonated with this idea of like where how kind of your culture came into play with how you thought this is the path I needed to go down, and then how you felt like there was no other role model around in that space. So I grew up in a really small rural community that doesn't see a lot of, so there were 14 people in my class, for instance. So there's not a lot of women, particularly when I was growing up. So I'm 27 now. So when I was younger, who really left our community and did anything beyond perhaps getting an education in something where they could, do hairstyling, or they could maybe work as a nurse in like the local town, the nearby town. But other than that, there was very little role models or experiences of women in my life who went out and did other jobs, and a lot of them took care of their families at home. A lot of men in my community that I grew up in leave the community and have to actually work like jobs in another province, and they fly in and out. So it's quite common that women in my life at that time were, caregivers, and that was the experience that I really had. And I also grew up with parents who tried to be very supportive. So my mom was a single mom for the first half of my life, but then my stepdad also really lovely, and they had the best of intention in that they would always say, you can be whatever you want to be, and we'll be really happy even if you're working at, a convenience store. But actually, in a lot of ways, that gave me no guidance into like what could I potentially do, and like what potential could I have. So I really felt a lot of the time that I just was like really lost. I wasn't sure what I even could potentially do. And I had a really terrible experience through high school, and similar to Ali, dealt with a lot of mental health issues. And as I kind of was getting into like grade 12 and getting into this time of like needing to go out and do something with my life, I was super just like, I don't know what to do, but I don't want to be a mother to like right now. I'm not ready for that. That was basically all I knew, was I wasn't ready to be a mother. And also I was like, I need to leave this town and I need to see what else I might want to do. And so like, I actually went to hair school. I did hairstyling. So I'm a hairstylist by trade. That was the first thing I did. And whilst I never worked in that other than like my on-the-job training, it was the first time that I went and did something that I actually like felt I achieved and did well. And I did really well in hair school. I was like, okay, I can actually go to school. I can do a program. I can like, just because I had a bad experience in high school doesn't mean that's going to be my experience for the rest of my life. And I think while that wasn't my path and I didn't enjoy that experience of actually like being in a very supportive, predominantly female community of people who were like constantly being like, that's the best haircut I've ever seen, or girl, you're the best. And like that really, really was just like not the experience I had before that. And also a lot of the women who, were my teachers and things, they weren't just, cutting hair. They were like running successful businesses. They were doing franchises. They were like, it was a different experience of like what people could do for me. So I think while I didn't go down that path at all in the end, and I kind of really, it's a really long story of how I even really got to where I got, but I found myself in Toronto after a while, and I was doing some work around like just after school programs. I was working with Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada. I was working with a lot of young people, and I had a terrible mental health time and ended up in care and in a hospital. And I just felt like the services that I received were not youth-friendly. I felt like they weren't reflective of any of the care that I actually needed. I felt very excluded from all of the conversations around my care. And I felt like that couldn't possibly be helpful for anyone. And if it was helpful for like maybe 5 people, then great, but that was not really, what we should have. And we shouldn't have a healthcare system that's like really not meeting the needs of the people that are going into that system. And so I was honestly just really angry. And I think that's kind of where a lot of my passion came from, was I was just like very angry. I had found myself in like this new city. I had found myself in a place where I had like a couple of people who were listening to me in my job that I had at the time. And they had connections to other people who were like working in these spaces. And they were just kind of like, let's get you talking about this. So I ended up mostly, really how I got into all of this was I met a a woman named Christine Hampton who ran the organization, the Sandbox Project. And I just met her through like basically a fluke that I met another person who listened to me rant on about this and was like, you should go tell this woman your story. And so she gave me space to continue to do advocacy around that. So I really started all of the work that I do by just like being a young person who honestly was just very angry and had a lot of things to say. And I tried to, I think, really listen to people like Christine and others who were around me. And I think we'll talk about mentors as we go on, who were telling, trying to help me shape that anger into a productive conversation and into ways where you can shift conversations forward. And so I'm super grateful for those people who helped me navigate, how do you move from being, very passionate about an issue or really feeling like this is a disservice or this is a, injustice that's being done to not only yourself, but to a community of people, to actually being able to like do something about that in a productive way that's not just fueled by rage. So I was very privileged to have that opportunity. And then I think really what happened there was that then I felt like it wasn't really fair that I didn't want to be an exception. I thought that like I was someone who, by all accounts, so just by the things in which I had done in high school and the activities that I participated in, was totally deemed a like at-risk young person. I was not on the path of being a young leader at this point in my life in any way. And I think a lot of that really influenced me thinking that, suddenly I was the only person, like I was really imposter syndromed. I really felt like I was in this place I wasn't supposed to be. And also I felt like nobody else who felt like me was in this space. So that felt really like wrong in a sense. I felt like, well, why am I the only person? And I don't really feel like it's fair for this to be like an exception. I shouldn't be the only one who gets to be here. And so that really is what started. And I think I heard this quote very early on in my life of nothing for us without us. And I think that really just like resonated with me, that there shouldn't really be policy, there shouldn't be programs, there shouldn't be advocacy that's happening with for communities without those communities involved. And I think the more that I then started talking to people in my community, which was, youth mental health spaces, I recognized that they all felt the same, that these services weren't built for them, that these services weren't made for them, that they weren't receiving the care that they needed. And I think that's what really drove me to do the work that I mentioned earlier around health rights and responsibilities. So really just trying to understand, because I felt like I didn't even understand what my potential was around, taking care of myself or what my rights were. And I felt like, being a part of those processes. And then that was the first part of my passion, but really in doing that work, I recognized there's so much beauty and so much power in the process of that. So even if you don't get a policy totally changed or the project doesn't work out, the process of engagement of actually being in a space with all together and creating those smaller communities is so powerful and brings so many people into a space where they have meaning and they have engagement and they have belonging. And whether or not that does anything besides that, and you actually get any advocacy pushed forward, I started to recognize, like, I love that process. I love bringing people together. I don't care if, like, at the end of the day, that's where the conversation goes. I love it if we get to try to drive incredible change. But if anything, if just someone walks away from that conversation feeling a sense of purpose and feeling a sense of belonging and having a sense of voice, because that's totally what, people early on in my life did for me, then I really think that that's like success in and of itself. So I really think just like what drives me is just creating, wanting to find those places for community, wanting to find those places for people to belong, and to find those, like, I don't know, non-conventional ways of, being a part of things. And just to briefly touch on, I think that idea of shared wisdom is really why I went into the work that I'm in now with Wisdom to Action, is because they really just resonated with me, of this idea of like trying to take collective wisdom, and as Ali said, it's collective lived experience and shared experiences, and then turning that into like action and driving change around that, and being able to make sure that those conversations are at the forefront. And again, I think what I really love about this organization is that we always try to make sure that change actually gets done, but ultimately we still recognize that the process is part of that. And if you're trying to rush forward to drive change and you're not bringing the right people to the table, you're not nourishing those those actual care and that actual conversation, then you're missing out on the opportunity there, especially when it comes to like mentorship and helping support each other.
Okay, thank you so much, Alyssa. I love what you said about taking that anger. I think a lot of people that end up kind of wanting to change policies or engaging in their communities start off with kind of being just like frustrated about something. And the trick is to figure out how to fuel that frustration into something productive. So we're going to delve into that in just a second. But beforehand, I want to kind of ask you guys like a lighter question. So I don't know if you know this, but this is a quote that a teacher was obsessed with that I know. It's by John F. Kennedy, who's a former US president. And he used to say that leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. So to be an efficient leader, you have to continuously be learning and kind of developing your skills and being on top of things in your field in order to kind of know what you're doing. So I wanted to ask you, what kind of learning are you doing? Are you reading a specific book right now? Are you listening to a podcast that you think has been helpful? Do you have any recommendations? Or is there some non-traditional learning that you continuously do throughout your experiences? So Media, do you want to start?
Sure, of course. I actually call myself a professional full-time student because I've been a student for my entire life till now. And aside from the fact I am now pursuing a master's in global affairs and economic, which is a field I absolutely have no knowledge or experience in, I do enjoy learning new stuff. I do like to do it both in traditional and non-traditional way. So in a traditional way, if you don't want to go to school or a college or an online program, for example, there's always many courses that you can take online. There's many websites, including, I think, Udacity is one of them that has like smaller courses, especially for technical skills. I am a big fan of what I call YouTube Academy. Anything you want in life is on YouTube. Figure your way around it. It's like my best, go-to learning tool in life. I do like to read a lot of books and listen to podcasts as well. And I like to listen to what's happening around the world and just to kind of increase my knowledge. Because I noticed over the past 2 years, coming from a technical field, we care about technicality, about things, about, if someone tell me like a system change topic or something high level, policy making, to me, this sounds like just a bluff. Like I have no idea what they're talking about. So I started to kind of talk to people in these fields, attend some events that made me very uncomfortable. So, prior to COVID, I used to go to websites that have events in the city, including Eventbrite, and I'll just go through the events happening around me, and I'll make sure that I pick an event that I absolutely do not want to attend and I have no interest in it, and I just go to that event. And I did it probably 5 or 6 times. It was brutal in some cases, to be honest, and I'm like, what on the face of the planet I'm doing here? But I still met phenomenal people. I still had a wonderful time. And I met many, many interesting people who looked at life very different than me. So that kind of challenged me to accept other people's view and perspective. So that's one thing they have done in kind of non-traditional learning and to be exposed to new knowledge. I also like to listen to different podcasts and stories on different topics. Now I'm focusing a lot more on China specifically, if that makes sense. Given my university is in Beijing and I'm doing lots of things with China. So my focus has been a lot more on China, and have been actually learning about Chinese history through films that I've been watching that would release at different decades in China. But I'm also learning about it through watching documentaries, which have given me an interesting view on policy, governance, global affairs, and what's going around us. Attending now with the virtual space, attending webinars and everything else is definitely something that's a lot more easier for many of us to be able to kind of explore. But definitely going to or attending events or going to places that make you uncomfortable is very useful. I have a massive list of books that I would recommend everyone to read. It's like a huge list, but I guess some of my top highlights, I really enjoyed reading the book called Educated by Tara Westover, I believe. And I just enjoy the views and perspective and the kind of the growth of that person I've gone through. There's the other book I would recommend is Sapiens. It will make you question many things in life, but it's also one of those things that, will help you look at things differently. There's The Power of Habit as well. Weapons of Math Destruction. And Canada specific, I think Indigenous relation, there's a book called Indigenous Relation was really interesting that gave me a new perspective on different things in life. But I've been, a full-time professional student, and I have been learning both in a traditional setting and non-traditional setting. This is my experience with learning.
Thanks, Media. I think that's super interesting that you find things you don't like. It kind of ties into into what you were saying about kind of seeking discomfort and kind of growing from things that are uncomfortable. I think that's a really good tip to kind of just like find something you hate and learn from it. And that definitely would lead to growth. So thanks for that. Alyssa, do you want to go next?
Sure. I would say that I am super lucky to get to work with like a million different teams. So that's like the one thing that I think really drove me to work in the job that I work in, is because I get to just work with a ton of different young people in different teams. And I'm constantly learning from them 100%. Also, definitely adding them all on Instagram has definitely been one of the most educational things. I've definitely recognized that I don't know what young people are into or what kinds of things that young people are doing, because I was kind of just like isolating myself in this bubble of only people in my own age group. And honestly, like building out community, even online, has actually taught me so much, because I realized that I was like isolating myself to be in my own little bubble of people who shared kind of the same stuff as me. And a lot of times the younger folks who I've been like engaging with share so many different things that I just wouldn't have thought of. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I would say that I listen to often a lot of podcasts that are not really related to anything to do with my work. I listen to American Hysteria because I'm really into all of the different hysterias that have have happened in America, particularly things like, influencer culture and how we got to where we got with a lot of things. And it's actually quite educational and really interesting to hear how a lot of things have come to be. I also listen to the You're Wrong About podcast, which is, I think, a really not related to the field of work that I do, but has taught me a lot of things about stories in history that I thought I knew the narrative of, particularly stories that have been shaped by Western media. And I think that they do focus on a lot of things that just, we miss because we only hear one narrative, a story, or we kind of stop investigating. So I like that kind of line of thinking. I also really am definitely a student of YouTube. I would particularly say that in my beginning of my work. So before I went back to school, so I at this point had only had like hairstyling as an education. So I had not done anything else. I started as a communications intern because I had an interview, and I totally in the interview was like, hey, I don't know how to do a lot of this work, but I'm really hardworking and I'm going to figure it out. I promise you. And what I meant was I will spend hours on YouTube trying to figure it out. So I taught myself how to use Excel and PowerPoint. I totally didn't even know how to use PowerPoint when I first started out. I was on YouTube being like, okay, how do I figure this out? And even now I'm that's exactly where I'll go first. And I'm not a huge book person. I'm more of a podcast person, but I am totally going to recommend reading Take Back the Fight by Nora Loretto. It's Take Back the Fight, Organizing Feminism for the Digital Age. And I will say that even if you're not, I'm definitely someone who identifies as a feminist, but I wouldn't say I'm somebody who is a feminist organizer. I'm not organizing feminist collectives on a regular or trying to do work that's really around that. But I thought, wow, how it really helped me in thinking about how do you apply a feminist lens though to the other types of organizing that you're doing, and even just in the way in which you're interacting in digital communities. And I thought it was really a really great read that I just finished. So yeah.
Thanks for that, Alyssa. So I think Ali, you're next. So how do you do your learning? Traditional or non-traditional?
So I actually laughed, Mia, because I call myself a professional student too. I call myself that. I've been calling it that for, oh my gosh, too long. But I've been in university like right out of high school, and then stayed in university. I'm still in university and then doing my master's. I went to internships at the same time as and my convocation day was literally the same day as my start for my internship. So I've never had a break in between. But again, I love that. And that's just who I am as a person. And if I could do more of it, and if there were more of me, I would do more of it. But for myself, I'm constantly challenging myself to learn. I'm constantly challenging myself to learn about things that I don't particularly know of just because of my own nature, because of knowledge that I've learned in school. So that being said, my degree is not in anything that I've been doing. My degree is not in politics. My degree is not in economics. My degree is nothing to do with the things that I do now. However, I had to teach myself how to do those things. So if I want to have a voice, and if I wanted to make some change and cultivate and foster a healthy environment, then I need to know what I'm talking about, and I need to know what I'm doing. So especially in my role when I was working directly with individuals who have mental illness as well, making sure that if I'm on the front line, I know exactly what I'm talking about, which is an extension of my own schooling, but also just learning from the people, right? There's no better learning than storytelling that I hear from, or learning from the lived experiences of other individuals, because that's what really puts a face to a problem or a face to something that we need to look at. And that is, for me, a constant learning experience. For me, sharing even things and getting out of my comfort zone, I can't stress enough, is as soon as you get uncomfortable, that's how you grow. If I stay in my one lane, then I probably would have only stayed with mental health, and I probably only would have stayed with women's rights issues. Whereas right now I'm looking at infrastructure, and I'm looking at things like policy development that I've never even thought of before. So things that I'm doing right now, I love documentaries. That is my go-to all the time. I'm always watching documentaries. Big listener into all the global affairs. I like to know what's going on in the world. I'm actually starting up my own podcast right now. So if you do have some good recommendations, please feel free to let me know. And that's just going to be showcasing some of the wonderful people in the city and people across the world who have really challenged the status quo on their own and broken down their own barriers. And for myself, I guess some books that would be very interesting, and some books that I would recommend. Anything right now is, I'm really interested in Kimberly Crenshaw. So she coined intersectionality and looks at it how we all face different oppressions and different systemic barriers through intersectionality and how that kind of plays out. So looking at my life and how I can apply those feminist lens, how I can apply feminist praxis and use intersectionality ideologies as a pillar for all that I do is incredibly important. Anything by Brene Brown, and specifically Dare to Lead for this panel, is something that I would recommend incredibly. She's an incredible woman. Her resiliency training is huge, and it's been a big factor into my life as to how I can always grow, how I can always change. And again, I think that we often learn the best from something that might be a lesson. So for me, I'm always taking what I can as lessons. There's a lot of things in my life. Again, this goes back to things that have hurt me in the past or things that have caused me pain in the past. But if somebody comes into my life, or if an individual leaves my life, or if there's a new opportunity in my life and it's showing its face to me, I'm not going to wait for that perfect time. I'm going to jump into it, and it's going to be a learning experience on its own, and I'm going to roll with the punches, but it's going to be something that in the end, I'm going to benefit from. So I'm constantly learning. Podcast research is, I'm always doing research. I'm always on one research project or another, whether it be with a group or something on my own. So it's just a constant learn, and it's a constant learning. I'm learning from myself every day. I learn something new about myself every day, something that I didn't think I was capable of doing. And so yeah, that's my learning experiences and how I ongo all of my different endeavors. And yeah, I definitely think that learning is one of the most valuable things there is out there, and I take great gratitude to learn every single day.
Thanks so much, Ali, and thank you to all three of you for your insight on that. I do agree. I think the most efficient leaders are those who are continuously learning, just because they're on top of what they're doing, and it's not perfect learning, but kind of engaging with the communities that are at stake and kind of just developing your own cultural knowledge helps you out for sure. So we have a question, and I just wanted to remind all the attendees that our Q&A is open. So if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A chat, and we'll make sure to ask them, and on YouTube as well in the chat. we have one from Asya, which actually leads us on to our next part about leadership styles. So discovering, she's asking, how are we going to discover our own leadership styles? So to start off this part, I thought we would kind of start off by reflecting on a quote by someone, so not necessarily related to governance, but it's the CEO of IBM, so Jeannie Rometty, who said, one of the most important things for any leader is to never let anyone else define who you are. And you define who you are. I never think of myself as being a woman CEO of this company. I think of myself as a steward of a great institution. So what do you think of this? How has your journey been in kind of defining who you are as a leader? What is your leadership style? What do you try and incorporate? Are you still learning how to be a leader? And if so, how do you do that? Do you have any specific things that you do in meetings or when talking to people or when creating projects that help you be an efficient leader? So I'm gonna start off with Alyssa, if you want to kind of start us off with that question.
Sure, thanks, Reem. I guess, so for me, I think when I first started to get into, so when I first started to move from doing advocacy work into trying to figure out what I was going to do more professionally, I was looking at, a lot of the people who I felt were driving change were people who were, young people who had companies of their own, or young people who were already like moving like quite high up in the ladder of places, or sitting in what I guess we call like more traditional leadership roles. So sitting in positions that we see as like higher leadership positions. And I felt really, I often went to like conferences and things where I would feel like I didn't fit in as being a young leader because I wasn't doing those things. I didn't have my own new project. I didn't have a new technology. I wasn't on that path. And I think what I started to realize though was like, was that really what I wanted? Like, was it that was I jealous because I thought that was like, because that's what it was. It was jealousy inevitably. And I was wondering, was I jealous of these things that I felt other people had because I actually wanted to have those things and drive that change? Or was it because I thought that that's what I should have? And that's what I thought a young leader looked like. And that's what I wanted to aspire to. And that's really what it came down to, was that it wasn't that I actually wanted to, to drive it, to take away from that, or I wanted to actually be that person who I would see on stage and I would be like, gee, I'm not as cool as that person. But actually it was just, that wasn't the change that I wanted to drive ultimately. It took me a long time to reflect, to like take some time to self-reflect on that, and to recognize that a lot of the times I was taught that there was only so much space for people in one industry, or, if someone else was doing it, then you should try to compete and do the same thing, or maybe I could do it better. Like that was really a mindset that I had, which is just like not at all my leadership style. And so what I came to realize is that whilst I am loud and extra and definitely have lots of qualities that some people might attribute to more to other leadership roles, I don't have to want to aspire to that. I don't have to want to take on those roles in that way. I feel like I'm someone who like takes on natural leadership roles in smaller spaces, and that's what I enjoy. I like building community based spaces, and I found that by just doing that. So I think when trying to figure out your leadership path, you really have to it's really about going out there and honestly a lot of self-reflection. I feel like it's a lot of like going into a role and then coming back and thinking, how is this actually what I'm wanting? How do I feel about this? Do I feel uncomfortable in a good way, or do I feel uncomfortable in a way where I'm like, maybe this is just not right for me? Because I think that that's also a lot of times I felt like I'm uncomfortable in this space, or I may be uncomfortable here. And I felt like that uncomfort was a growth uncomfort. But then I had to recognize where there's two different things. There's being uncomfortable in a space because it's not the right space for you. And there's being uncomfortable in a space because you're learning from that space and you're growing from that space. And I think that comes from your own, from within, and really recognizing, really, does this benefit me, and how does this benefit me, and what ways am I impacting in this space? And if the answers are, I don't feel like I'm benefiting from the space, and I don't feel like I'm benefiting anyone else from being here, then perhaps, it's time to look at something different. And I think that for me, really recognizing that you don't need to be in like larger spaces, you can drive incremental change, and then that can build larger change. So my way of working is looking for those small ways of impacting communities or impacting an organization. So really just looking at how do you bring more equity to that conversation, or how do you bring more inclusion to the space, or how do you bring more young people or more. So really just driving those smaller changes and creating those smaller spaces to then ultimately create, a larger community that's, more inclusive, more. So I think sometimes it's looking at what, so I'm still someone who thinks that there needs to be these large scale changes and these large scale thinkers, but I'm not one of them. I'm someone who likes to think about the small things, thinking about like, how can we provide housing within our community at this time, and not how can we figure out housing for the entire country. I'm more of a small scale, like how can we figure out how this community accesses food, and how can we try to build the capacity in this community, and how can we bring this community to the table and just work on that space. And hopefully documenting that. I'm a big person on like documenting stories and documenting shared experience, so that maybe we can drive a larger change ultimately, but that's someone else's side to think about. So I think, and recognizing that those are both really important roles to have. And those are both leadership roles. You can be a leader in smaller scale change and smaller scale development and smaller conversations. You don't always have to be looking for, an idea and sitting back. And I think that's also stopped me from being a leader for a long time, because I was sitting down, jotting in a notebook, trying to brainstorm what company will I start? What charity will I start? What issue will I take on? And it wasn't that. I already knew which issues I cared about. I already knew which communities I wanted to bring to the table. And I started to do it that way. And I'm just like, I sit back in awe of the people doing the other work, but it's just not my leadership style. And I think both are very important. And I think recognizing that both have value is really been important for me in my leadership journey. So hopefully, if you're someone trying to do the same thing, I think it is a lot of reflecting on that, and also just recognizing that, both have value, and you can find your own type of space, even if it's not where you've traditionally seen leaders exist.
Thank you so much for that, Alyssa. I'm going to popcorn it over to media. So same question. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Stream. I think when we talk about leadership style and understanding your own leadership, I think it's a very vague term that could mean many things to many people. And many people think that if you want to build your leadership style, that means what issues you're going to work on, what industry, what job, but that's not true. What's really important is actually building that leadership potential inside you before you actually go and try to tackle any issues. And I think what's very important, what many of us miss from our education system to the culture to many things, is helping us understand ourselves more than anything else. So I would always suggest anyone who is interested to start a business, do something different, take on more responsibilities in life, to do a personality test and get, a career coach, an advisor, someone to help you out. There's many free and available personality tests that will give you just rough understanding of who you are as a person, including the MBTI test, the Hogan assessment. And what's useful about these things is that you will suddenly stop being frustrated about your own self or how the people treat you, because you suddenly understand how sometimes the way you behave impact people around you. Or you start to understand that, not everyone think like me, not everyone do the things like me, so those people are different, so I should account, to become more inclusive to what possibilities exist. And to give you guys an example, doing the things I used to do, I'm a very extroverted person. So I always talk, I always do everything. And I get so annoyed when people interrupt me when I speak to tell me something. But because I'm an extroverted, I used to do it all the time without subconsciously knowing that I'll do it. But then when I had to lead teams, as the extrovert in the room, I'll speak all the time and not listen to anyone. And many introverts are uncomfortable speaking up when other people are talking all the time. So now I know that I'm an extrovert, but I also know how the introverts behave very differently than me. So when I'm sitting in a meeting, I learned how to actually shut my mouth for a bit and actually listen to everyone, but also to actively ask those who have been quiet to share their thoughts. And sometimes they need to share their thought differently. Maybe it's a day after, maybe they need a minute to think about their thoughts. But understanding my own strengths and weaknesses did help me accomplish many things and overcome challenges. And especially when you have to lead team and dynamic and you're being held accountable for stakeholders and organizations, you have to be able to understand what makes you strong, what's your strength, and act on them, and what are your weaknesses, so you could actually build a team around you or build a mechanism that help you tackle many of these things. So definitely understanding yourself, your personality, your strength is a key strong thing to help you accomplish things. And the second thing is that you have to be a very well-rounded person. In a sense, you have to think of yourself as a T-shaped individuals. You should be comfortable talking about many different topics, ideas, fields, industry, at least at the surface level, and specialize in one or two areas, but be able to expose yourself to different school of thought, different organizations, what other issues are happening, and just be able to really think about stuff from different lens and perspective. Because when you build these habits or this kind of skill to navigate things differently and learn about many different stuff, you will be able to lead more successfully. If you're given a challenge your way, you will just know exactly how to tackle it, where to go, what to do, because you already have that foundation good to go. But if you're just an expert in one area and you have no idea what's happening somewhere else, your chances of actually being a successful leader might actually decrease tremendously. And I do think there's a lot of training on, for example, inclusive leadership, communication style, public speaking, that truly makes a huge difference in what's going on. And I guess one last thing I will kind of say and leave it for many people to think about. As women, we tend to, and this is more of like a global survey that happened, women tend to usually underestimate their own capabilities, or they overthink some stuff. Because usually when it comes to applying to jobs, as an example, men tend to apply to job when they qualify 60%, women do it when they qualify 100%. So what I'm trying to say is that when you work with different genders and organizations, you will notice things that will annoy you, as in that person might not have the same qualification as me, but that person is speaking all the time. So you should be able to kind of actively analyze the situation around you and be able to act on them and leverage the situation to your own benefit and value. But that will come after being very much aware of your own strengths and weaknesses, being able to look at different areas and spaces in the same time, and being welcoming uncomfortable situation that you look for them as a learning opportunities, and honestly asking for help when you have no idea what's going on, and surrounding yourself with a team of supporters, friends, mentors who will be there to help you when you have no idea what to do, because none of us could, do everything on our own. We need to have that support all the time.
Okay, thank you so much, Media, for sharing that. So Ali, just same question, but I also kind of wanted to tie in. So the Media kind of talked about it, the difference that you see between female leadership styles and then kind of men in the leadership space. Do you think that while developing your leadership style, you've seen or faced certain stereotypes that women kind of get imposed on women, have had to kind of surpass those barriers? And if you had any examples on that in your field as well, that would be great.
Yes, for sure. Thank you. So right from the get-go, I am Portuguese, and my family still upholds very patriarchal and very old school living. So for me, kind of challenging that in itself was already moving away from what a traditional woman would do, or the domestication of what a woman would do, or the jobs that a woman would do. You don't see women very much working really late in my countries, unless it's, at nursing or something like that. But for me, it was from the get-go. I have always been somebody who challenges things that I didn't see myself in. And I think to answer the first question about the leadership, and how people find it for themselves, you need to understand yourself. What Media said, you need to understand your weaknesses. You need to understand your strengths. In order to do that, you're going to be able to know exactly who to help and how to help them. You're going to be able to be confident in yourself. And that's the biggest key takeaway here, which leads me into answering your question. So for myself, I'm covered in tattoos. I worked in the legislature assembly here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I had many, many times of people saying, "Oh my goodness, a woman in politics and covered in tattoos. Like, are you going to hide those?" And for me, I'm not, because that it's an expression of who I am. It's an expression of art, and that's who I am as an individual. But one of the things that I actually was dealing with quite a bit, and I had this discussion a little while ago with a group of young women, and they said to me, is it okay for me to say this, or is it too much of me for saying that? And I said, I've been thankful enough for myself to never deal with imposter syndrome. I've never had to deal with that. And I think that is primarily because I had such a good sense of my own self and what I was able to bring to the table at any kind of table and any kind of setting, and what I was able to do with that. So just having big confidence in myself, in my beliefs, and staying true to who I was as an individual was very, very important to take off into my career and continuously every day. So for people that are sitting there and wondering how you're going to find it, find yourself, find what you are inside, your passions are, and put them in the priority, because don't allow things on the side or people on the side to sway you away from what your goals are and what is right, because there are going to be people that are going to be doing that, and there are going to be people that are going to challenge you for that. And myself, being in a male dominated field, politics is a male dominated field, and really advocacy, philanthropy, a lot of it is in a male dominated field. And so for myself, I often find myself being one of the only woman in the room, or maybe even the only woman in the room a lot of the time when it comes to debates, or when it comes to panels, or when it comes to community committees. And for myself, I've had a lot of people ask me how I hold myself. And I say, I hold myself the same way that any of the other people around the corner do, or around the table do, and maybe even a little bit better, maybe even a little bit more, because I'm so sure and I'm so dedicated and so committed to these passions. So if you're ever sitting there, and this is going for all the mentees and everybody watching, if you're sitting there and you're thinking that I don't know if I can do it, I don't know if it's my place, and maybe they'll say this or they'll say that, don't allow those negative self-talks or those negative stereotypes or the narrative that's out there in society to take you away from what is the most important cause, right? And leadership in itself, for me, is the most important part of leadership. And what I've learned over leadership for myself is that we need to understand that leadership isn't about just us, right? So I'm a role model. I have two beautiful little sisters in my life. I have a younger brother, but my little sisters look up to me. Many young women look up to me. I've now done 500 talks across Canada, and all those young people really, really speak to me. And so it's understanding that there are eyes on me, and that I do need to be a role model. I do need to be the best self that I can be for others, but also while staying true to myself, and then making sure that not only am I a role model, I'm understanding that leadership is not about myself, right? Leadership is not about me. It's not about the power that I get at the end of the day. It's not about a success or another thing on my resume. It's not about that. The leadership is making sure that other people's interests are being put first. So for me, all my work I do is looking at everything through, how is this going to benefit the other people? It may not even be something that I agree with. It may not even be something that I hold in my heart as a dedicated piece to my advocacy. However, if this is something that affects others' human rights, or infringes on human rights, or something that affects other people, then it affects me. And that is something that I've been able to take into my leadership. Is my leadership is not one person leadership. My leadership is guided by the community, and it's guided by needs. But upholding yourself and making sure that you have confidence in your words, and making sure that you walk into a room and you enter a room and you really uphold yourself, and you really uphold everything that you stand for. But I would really just suggest that and I couldn't agree more with Media. There's not one particular way to lead, right? There's so many different ways to lead. And if we are able to tap into those ways, then I think that will extend all of our own assets and extend the benefits that are going to come out of leadership. For me, it's incredible to be able to watch the amazing things that come out of being a leader, but also to challenge that narrative. There is something very powerful and empowering in myself of being able to move mountains, to cultivate change, and to foster a safe environment for individuals, and more importantly, inspire other women and young women to really go for it, and to really understand that the power is within them. The resiliency is something that we grow over time, but this is something that they're able to do. And despite any challenges and despite any hurdles that may come in front of them, their leadership will persevere further than any of that. So just making sure that you are confident in yourself, making sure that you don't doubt yourself, and be strong in that and hold yourself to that. So, and it's another big thing too, is I have to remind everybody, you know, as somebody who's a mental health advocate, it would be privy of me not to sit here and remind everybody that we can only give so much. We cannot save the world. And that is a huge thing that we need to understand. Ever since I was a little girl, I've had a problem with understanding that I can't fix everything all at once. But, you know, if we have our cup of water and there's a bunch of communities who need water and they're thirsty, I'm not going to be able to fill their cups up unless mine is all the way filled. And that's the way I look at myself, as leadership, mental health, making sure that I'm the best self that I can be in order to help so many different communities. So leadership, yes. Am I challenged in my gender equity in terms of where I am in my work? Absolutely. Is there challenges that I face every day? You know what, there would be, and I'm sure if I sat there and I thought a little bit more into it, I'm sure I could create and develop a bunch on my own. But the point is, and the point that I really need to drive home here, is that you need to be confident, and you know, you need to hold your beliefs true to yourself no matter what. And no matter what you do, there's always going to be people out there who are going to say your leadership is the wrong way, but there's also going to be 1,000 more to that one person who is cheering you on, who's benefiting from your leadership, which is the most important part about leadership for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ellie. And I think it's so important to remember why you do what you do, and to recenter the purpose around the communities and the interests, the best interest of those communities at stake. I think we're gonna go through maybe one question in the Q&A, and then just to close off, what kinds of practical tips you'd have for mentees. But we do have an interesting question in the Q&A. It's from Ikram, who says, so in Tunisia, we work a lot on transformative or transformational leadership that focuses on the impact of one's leadership on those around us. So families, friends, work, community. Can you tell us more about how your leadership has impacted others, specifically young women, at a national or global level? I know, Ali, you just talked about your younger sisters and being a role model to others and kind of creating that space, or that first kind of example in media too. You said you didn't have role models around you. So maybe we can start off. So Ellie, media, do you want to kind of touch upon that, and then I'll hand it over to someone else after?
Sure, absolutely. So in terms of what I have done, using the word impact is also one of those words that I tie in the same bucket as leadership. That could mean many things. So I think in my work specifically, I have done like outreach to schools, to organization, to women-focused groups, where we talked about many things and many different, you know, based on the hats that I wore over the years. And there was a lot of like direct mentorship, a lot of support, sharing resources, network, making introductions. I do believe that, you know, your network is your net worth, and who you know in life makes a difference. So to me, if I could connect people to others, especially that I tend to travel globally a lot for my jobs and for other things. And whenever I meet someone who does amazing thing, I'm like, I should connect you with that person. I don't know why, but you guys should talk. So this is, in my opinion, a way to build an impact, to support these women, to help them in their journey. But I do the same thing as well for my male peers. So it's not just women, it's everyone. But I do try to pay an extra attention to many of the quiet women in the room, because sometimes they might be the ones who are facing just different layers in front of them and many issues that they need to overcome as well. I also have looked at the impact that we do in terms of more systematic change than just the end result and who you kind of talk to, but rather than just being in the room itself and being able to talk to organization, represent who you are as a person, and being able to share your identity with others as well, and being able to tell them like, hey, what makes me different than everyone in the room. And similar to what Ali mentioned, I work in a very heavily male-dominated field. Literally less than 5% in the technology entrepreneurship space are women. So there's not that many women around us in the space. And being different, being unique, being able to channel the fact that I'm the only woman in the room, people remember me. I look at it as a positive way. And I'm willing to sometimes ask the tough questions. If someone makes a comment I think is, you know, weird, that you shouldn't say at this time and age, I just ask them like, where's that coming from? Why did you say this? And try to actually have a conversation and try to kind of open up an understanding. And this is, to me, it's more of trying to disrupt the system, the way people think, and some of the assumptions people have about you, the way you look, the way you sound, the way you behave. rather than just what's the end result. Because if I could change someone's mind, then that change will be more of like a chain reaction that could build on and on, rather than just the impact and the result. So I look at impact as a very hard thing to define, because it could be at different stages and different walks and paths in life. And having said that, feel free to reach out to me. I'm very unique name on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me if you want any help or if you want to talk or anything else. I'm always happy to help.
Thank you so much, Media. Alyssa, do you want to kind of bounce off of that?
Yeah, sure. And I think that in reflecting on just some of the things that have been said, that are really a thing that has resonated with my leadership style, or like shaping my leadership style, is trying to figure out how to like reduce the gaps between my values and my actions. So I am somebody who like has a lot of very strong values and thinks I care a lot about people. I think I center a lot of my things around the fact that everybody is everyone's worthwhile and has value and has a place. And I think that trying to think about the way in which I reduce those gaps was really a big part of helping to drive, where, and continues to drive, like, even if I'm not really sure where I'm going, sometimes I try to go back to that and I'm like, what are my values here, and how am I like able to action that out? And maybe sometimes you have to, challenge that or shift that. But I think, just really moving into that and trying to relay that. And I think also just really when it came to, challenging the different ways in which I would say that it depends on the space that I'm working, and if it's more male dominant. I've sometimes work with charities, and I often find that nonprofits and charity spaces are more female dominant often, whereas I find government spaces and policy spaces are more male dominant. I also I think one of the things that I like to think is that it has come a bit of a way. I remember one of the first meetings that I sat in, and I spoke up and was talking about, I didn't agree with the way they were talking about young people, and they were also talking particularly about Indigenous communities in Canada with no Indigenous people in the space. And I remember speaking up and trying to shift the conversation to not decide what project we were going to do here, but instead figuring out, let's instead shift to building out a plan of how we'll engage other people and get other feedback on this idea, and then we can move forward from there. And I remember going to the washroom and another woman coming in later, and she was like, you have a really great idea, but you're going to have to convince the men at our table that it's a good idea and that it's their idea, or we're never going to get it pushed forward. And like, did I have to do that in that time? Yeah, I did. I actually did. Like, and for a little while, I actually really prided myself. I don't know, language is escaping me, but I really liked this idea that I could convince particularly men that my idea was their idea so that we could push it forward. And then I was like, no, wait, that's so crap. Don't take my idea. Like, I want that. Like, that's my idea. You don't get to I shouldn't have to convince you that it's your idea so that you can steal my idea to push that forward. And I think I feel a lot less of that now, but I did see that in a lot of spaces. And even just like that kind of advice from women who were like, more about preserving male ego so that we could push ideas forward versus trying to combat both of those things. And I think, so I think I try to challenge those conversations a lot more in my life, and we'll say, actually, like, I have a really great idea. Here's what this great idea is. And I'll keep being relentless, and I'll keep sharing the idea. And instead of trying to convince someone else that it's theirs. And I think also just looking at, I guess sometimes the way in which we have kind of left rural women out of some conversations here in Canada. So I think a big part of the things that I see and that I've tried to speak up around are just the way in which rural women in particular aren't as supported. And so I think a lot of times we recognize progress moving forward, and we see women in different spaces, and we think that that's really great, and we've gone really we've done it all. And I think we can talk about the same thing for like women of color in different and being in spaces as well. And the fact that, you know, women who look like me, who are white, often do get, like, our leadership has, you know, increased significantly, whereas there's still a lot of gaps that exist for other women in places that we really need to be considering. Trans women in Canada also really not being uplifted into the places of power that they should be. So I think also thinking about those lenses, and whilst we do have some progress happening, I think that progress looks a lot more like progress for some and not necessarily progress for all. And I think, and just bringing that back to the rural women conversation, is that I think in Canada sometimes we look at having, you know, different women in these places and thinking that that's going to shift policy. So we often think, you know, we've got more women in politics and that shifts policy forward for women, but, you know, that's actually not the reality. And research shows us that we can have women in policy spaces, but actually if they're not advocating for women's rights, or if they're not advocating on behalf of all women, that we don't really push women's areas forward. So I think really I've seen a lot of that where there's been women in places, but they're not actually advocating a lot of times for the women for all women, or for women who, you know, often really need that advocacy, or really are needing more support, specifically in social support and policy areas. I think we leave out some of the most vulnerable women in those areas still, and that a lot of that comes around to bringing those women to the table, which, as I've mentioned several times, is really what I care about.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Alyssa. So Ali, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to the question as well, but I'm going to bring in our closing off question so that we can all kind of reflect on it and then kind of wrap up. So just in general, the practical tips that you would give someone starting out in leadership. We've talked a lot about it, and I'm going to kind of summarize what you all spoke about, but Ali, if you'd like to share that after kind of bouncing off of what Alyssa just said, so we can wrap up, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So for myself, leadership and some things that I've done in terms of examples, and I'll just kind of go over this quite quickly. Some of the initiatives that I've done, and this goes back to my leadership style of understanding that, you know, it's not about me. It's not a one-person issue. This is everybody's issue, right? And that's why I'm taking it on. When I was sitting in my position as the women's representative at the University of Manitoba for the Art Student Body Council, I had some individuals come up to me and talk to me about their concerns. We have a gym on campus called the Active Living Center. We all pay into it with our tuitions, and there's no option to have an opt-out fee. So therefore, this is something that should be for everybody. So at this time, there was a lot of people not attending. I wasn't attending. I didn't even know that it was in our tuition at this time. It was brought to my attention. And so I wanted to know why aren't people attending? So with that, I worked and I mobilized a bunch of different collectives and had some interviews with a lot of the different student groups on campus, like the Indigenous Student Association, the Muslim Student Association. And I worked very closely with the Muslim Student Association, and I understood that the women want to work out, but they're wearing their hijabs and they cannot go swimming in the water while it's co-ed time. I also found out that individuals who are non-binary and trans individuals didn't feel comfortable going to the gym due to the very gendered washrooms, the very gendered setting of the gym, and a lot of the toxicity that was there. So I worked very hard and collectively to work with these groups, and I approached the Active Living Center, and I have now made, and it's still there since I've graduated. I actually looked online like a couple days ago, but it's still there since I graduated. And we collected exclusive gym hours for those individuals, so that there is women-only swim time. There is time for non-binary and trans individuals at these gyms. That was huge for me. And again, that's not my place, but again, it was my place because I seen something that was infringing upon human rights, and we all pay into it. It's a no-brainer for me. This is something that I need to move on. I need to act on. Moving forward, like the getting rid of how we can, or wanting to increase the diversity of women on our panels and our commissions and our committees, and amplifying their voices. So removing the Canadian citizenship as a requirement to apply for civic boards, committees, or commissions was a massive step in leadership for me. I've done a lot of different kinds of interactions. I've done a lot of rallying. I've done a lot of marches. I've done a lot of speaking and keynotes at those events themselves. And for me, it's always just looking at how I can better something for other people, even if it's something that's not in my scope, right? And that's really the most important thing for me. So some practical tips that I would give to the mentees and to anybody who's watching this and wanting to start off on their journey. I think that it's very important that we need to be understanding that us as individuals are so much in ourselves, and so often in the world, and especially young women, we often seek validation from other people, or we seek gratification from other things, or we seek something from other people, but we have to learn how to do that and seek it from ourselves. So for a long time, I was under the narrative of, at this age, you need to be married, you need to have kids, and you need to have this many kids, and you need to be living out on your own in a nice house, and that's what you need to be doing. I'm 27 years old. I'm single. I have 0 kids, and for me, that was a big challenge against the own narrative. But I want to tell people that leadership doesn't need to look like what everybody's framed it out to be. So if there's something that you think that is holding you back, don't listen to the social narratives. There is no time clock that we need to all follow. There's no social time clock that we all need to abide by. Practical tips is, there's going to be people and there's going to be defeats that we have. So if you get up and you try something and it doesn't work out, that means you're just going to have to try again. We need to accept the defeats and not allow them to defeat us completely. We need to learn from all of those things, and we need to not let those people who want to see us down keep us down. We need to get back up every single time, because we are our own people who are challenging ourselves. Like I said, resiliency is something that comes from us and comes from within and comes from our pain, our lessons, and those things that we learn from individuals. So when you want to start, believe in yourself, go in strong, put on some lipstick if you need, hold your head high, and make sure that you are confident in yourself. And whether this be a male or anybody who's listening and wanting to be in this field, just understand that you are allowed to take up space, and there is nothing wrong with it. And you are allowed to speak up, and your voice is valued and your work is valued. So idling by is and being an ally is great, but there's a lot more that you can do. So don't hold back your potential. Don't dim your light for other people. If somebody thinks you're too much or you're a lot, that's great. And that's a good thing. You should be a lot, and you should be too much, because that means that you have a lot of different things to offer in a lot of different areas. And that's one thing that I really had to learn this last year for myself as an individual, is that, we can't change ourselves for anybody, and we can't make ourselves change for other people's comfort. We must constantly remind ourselves who we are and what we want to do differently in the world. So go for it and believe in yourself. And if any point anybody would like to reach out to me, absolutely, I'm more than happy. I champion all women's success, all young leaders' success. I'm more than happy to provide some support and some advice if I can. So I wish everybody good luck in their endeavors, and I really hope that this talk has inspired you to go for whatever it is that you're wanting to go for, and to challenge those status quos.
Thank you so much, Ali, for sharing all of that insight and for the tips that you gave. We're just gonna wrap up with Media and Alyssa. So I'm just gonna kind of summarize what tips have come out of this conversation. I think kind of calls to action or things that you can implement in your everyday journeys, as well as mentees and just as people in general who are watching, who want to start off in leadership, are important. So a lot of what has come up in this conversation is looking around us, finding what we're interested in, and then looking at the gaps. So whether that be for Ali, who was facing mental health issues and was looking at the gaps in that and trying to solve those problems, whether that be personal stories where you found that there wasn't a solution for something and you kind of wanted to do something about it. Something that came up a lot was just trying things out. So this is what Media was talking about. You're frustrated about a problem, you're frustrated about the refugee crisis, or you're frustrated at the fact that not a lot of women are involved in your community. Well, great, but then try it out, try and do something about it, try and just start. And even if it's uncomfortable, or if there's any failures involved with that, there's going to be a learning experience from there, and that's where your leadership style will come as well. So just to kind of bounce off of that, I'll start with Media. So Media, to wrap us up, do you have any final tips for everyone, and just some final remarks before we come off?
Absolutely, I'll be very quick. I hope some of you are taking notes because I'm going to give you a list of things to do as a homework, and I hope you try it out for at least 2 weeks and see how you feel. One of the things is that you need to kind of look into getting that personality test, understanding your strengths and your weaknesses, and then building a plan on what you would do to kind of act on your strengths, but also improve some of the weaknesses, or finding strategies to help you improve them. And like I said, there's tons of tips on the YouTube Academy field that will help you gain some ideas and be inspired to what you can do. Also, another thing that I would like many people who are watching us to try and do is reach out to one person every day and have this like literally on your agenda, your calendar, whatever you use. Make sure that you tick this off every single day. Reach out to a person. It could be a mentor, could be someone that you like their work, could be an activist in your community, it could be anyone. Just reach out to them on LinkedIn, on social media, whatever it is. Don't expect that they'll get back to you, but if they do, make sure that you actually keep that conversation going and find time to talk to them and kind of open up this network to yourself. And lastly, think of what skills you would like to learn that will help you in the future. Especially, I'm talking about, you know, technical skills, soft skills. Think of what you can do to improve yourself, because you need to take care of yourself and be able to learn new skills so you could tackle issues that you care about as much as possible. And good luck to everyone, and feel free to reach out if I can be of help to anyone.
Thank you so much, Media, for sharing that. And so to close us off, Alyssa, do you have any final remarks or tips for our mentees?
Sure. I think both Ali and Media really covered it off on a lot of these really great tips and really where we can go. I think the only things I have to add are really, you know, be authentic. You can be weird, you can be yourself, you can be different from other people in the spaces that you see and still really be a leader in those spaces. And actually that'll be a strength. Reiterating, you know, try to reduce the gaps between your values and your actions can really be a way to help try to find your path. Take risks, and then also just as like the very final words, I mentioned before that I really came to the space because I thought, you know, we really want to make spaces so that other people can come to the table. And so I really resonate with Kamala Harris when Kamala Harris says, I may be the first, but I won't be the last. And I think that's a really important thing to think about in leadership too, is maybe you'll be the first in that space, maybe you're the first to do it, but how can you not be the last? How can you set a way for others to be leaders in this space, and for other women in particular to come up and you know, be inspired and be leaders as well. So thank you so much for having me. I'm also happy to talk to others beyond this. So you can connect with Reem, I guess, and get our info if you want to connect with us.
Okay, well, that wraps us up. So thank you so much to our 3 incredible panelists for their time today. We really appreciate you coming on here and accepting our invite. Just some final remarks for our mentees. So this will be this is recorded, and the video will be on YouTube. We'll be sending it out to you as well. And yeah, just to thank a few individuals too. So thank you to our colleagues at the Forum of Federations who helped set up this webinar, as well as those in the regional offices that work on the MENA project. We appreciate all of your support. And yeah, I think that's it. So thank you so much, Media, Ali, and Alyssa, for your time. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we can connect again soon.
Thank you.